17.
You know, I was
42.
infantry. I can't count past the number of fingers and toes I have, Doc.
Get a dice.
Ooh, I can roll a 20. Well, yeah, that still only gives me 20. I don't think they have more than that for dice, do they?
Yes, they do. They have up to 100.
No, you just roll the tens, like the percent dice. You just
No,
two together.
no, they have 100-sided dice.
Is it like the size of your house? I mean, how big does it have to be?
Not big.
Okay.
It's in my gaming stuff. I don't have it ready.
All right, you're going to have to show me offline then. All right. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado, we would like to thank you for sticking with us through season 1, and the kickoff episode of season 2 is right here. And so we thought, what better than an Army podcast to have an Army guest? So we've got the one, the only the retired Lieutenant Colonel Brenden Wilson is an Army boy made good. So Brenden, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's a great honor. I listened to a couple of your episodes. I realized you guys are pretty fast moving. I'm a little bit slower than that, so I hope you'll have some patience with me.
We can adjust to that. That's not a problem.
All right, good stuff. That's
mostly because we have like ADD and look, squirrel.
I do that too. So anyway, so I'm Brenden Wilson. I'm 63 years old. I spent 25 years in the Army, retired in 2004. I went immediately to work for NATO. I worked as a defense planner and diplomat for the next 15 years. In 2018, I was diagnosed with PTSD, having spent some time in Iraq and Libya and a few other places, sent back to the United States for treatment from the VA. Since that time, I have been writing my book, The Achilles Battle Fleet. It's finally out in publication. I also had started law school many, many years prior, and I took that up again, and I'm almost finished. I'll be done in May, I hope, God willing.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. And I'm just very, very happy to be here talking to you guys, to have a chance to discuss with other veterans and also to talk about the book.
I had a boomer moment and forgot that I muted because Alvis was howling downstairs. All right, that's yeah, and I don't even know where all those years and all that starts and stops, but we're just gonna go with it because it sounds cool. And somebody put it on a T-shirt once, so it's got to be true.
JR, you were just born a boomer?
This is also true. But, I mean, I'm not as cool as some. I didn't get the T-shirt. Don't tase me, bro!
No. You are not 9 years old. You do not just get to randomly use that word.
No. Did you, you don't remember when that guy was speaking? I think it was John Kerry was doing a town hall or something, and this guy was just going nuts, and so the cops went to get him, and he started screaming, "Don't tase me, bro," with this like frat boy accent. And then when that happened, because he got locked up, and he was a business major, which is why this is funny, he was going for his MBA. While he was locked up, someone else trademarked that, got it on T-shirts, and made millions of dollars in merch in the first week because everyone thought it was hilarious. And when he got out, the momentum was shifted, and the business major missed the opportunity he created. I had my roommate was a business degree chaser, so anyway, I just always thought that story was funny. Anyway,
and now
we'll move on. We're not here to talk and reminisce. Yes, I've proven it. So normally we would ask the guest tell you how we first found the guest, but this one was actually easy. So his publicist reached out to us, and so Doc made the schedule happen, and here we are. It's time for your favorite questions now.
Yay! So we have religion questions: Starship Troopers, the Tomorrow War, or Independence Day. Which one would you pick?
Okay, so I have a confession to make. I liked Starship Troopers, the book. So I know that's not an answer to the question. It's a great book. I didn't really like the movie. If I had to pick a movie, I would probably pick Independence Day just because it was entertaining to me. So I hope that answers that question.
I think Starship Troopers is a litmus test movie. If you are talking to somebody and they go, "Oh," and all they understand is the movie, and they don't understand that the book existed first, they're not that into classic science fiction.
Yeah, that's right. And I liked the book
Yeah, but I
because
mean,
it was military aspect. So
but the movie was the gateway drug for some people to find Heinlein.
No,
Like I
that's
watched the movie
fine.
before I knew there was a book. Although I was a kid when the movie came out. So it
That's
came out in what,
fine.
93, I think?
That is
Whenever it came
completely
out,
fine.
it was
I
in
have watched like high schoolers try and throw down with adults about whether or not the book was based off the movie, and I'm like, oh gosh.
no,
So I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a fan, but it does mean that they have stuff to learn.
Yeah,
So
it's 97. I just Googled it. It was 97, so I would have been 16 years old. So I was at the right age for that to sound cool. And then I read the book, and I remember being disappointed because the movie's definitely an action movie. Lots of pew pew and cool explosions. The tactics suck. Like they totally ignored all tactics and equipment. But that's another rant. But then you
and
get to the book, and it's almost like it's a political treaty almost. It was interesting. I enjoyed it, but it like you just have to accept that they're different properties with the same name, and then you're okay. But I think people that love the movie are the ones that watched the movie first. Because anyone that read the books first, I don't think they could suspend their disbelief enough to like the movie.
I think you're right. Yep.
But I mean, come on.
My
Disney was
experience
kind of
says
awesome.
you were right, but that's okay. You can be right once in a while. So, on to the next round of
Is your
questions.
brain gonna melt?
Not my brain, just Jennifer Blackstream's. So I've never heard of this first one, so hopefully you have, sir. The Biggles, which is a 1986 movie. White Tiger.
It is amazing.
I know what you put on pizza.
Yes, no pineapples, as it was intended by God himself. He
White
called me.
Tiger.
He's like, JR, we don't do that.
White Tiger or Wonder Woman?
Okay, so I always thought you guys would know what Biggles was because when I saw that written in the questions, I thought, what the heck is Biggles? I don't actually know that. Wonder Woman is the only one of the three that I've seen that, so that's the one I got to pick.
That's fine. Wonder Woman's amazing.
Yeah.
So Biggles is a time travel movie in which someone from modern times, although this was filmed in the 80s, so you know the era of punk bands and such, before everyone realized they were all corporate shills. But it was this guy from in London gets transported back to World War I and ends up joining and fighting with a fighter squadron against the Red Baron. It is an awesome movie about time travel, and you should all watch it. And if you haven't, you should all be ashamed of yourselves. Hang your head in shame for you not know. That's like your St. Christmas
right now.
Day moment. Yeah. All right. You would enjoy the movie. It is excellent, Doc. Don't give me that look. You would love it.
No.
There's planes, there's pew pew, there's war. It's awesome. It's nice and peaceful enjoyment. I never should have given you the power of the banners.
Okay. Your questions are next year.
Yes, ma'am. All right. So we here at the Blasters and Blades podcast love both the fantastical and the scientific. So what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
My first love was sci-fi. You know, we were just talking about Heinlein. I actually read his book Space Cadet, which I think was written in the 40s or maybe the early 50s. And then I loved Starship Troopers. For Asimov, I'd probably say the Foundation trilogy, Stranger in a Strange Land. Later in life, in my 20s, I had read the Xanth series, or I started to read it, the Xanth series by Piers Anthony, which falls into the fantasy thing. But I think I just read it to enjoy it. I didn't really get into all the details of it. I didn't follow it up, and I don't really read that much in the way of fantasy.
Okay. What was that, Doc?
Nothing.
Okay. I thought you were saying something. So what was your first memory of engaging in science fiction? Was it reading Space Cadet? Was it watching, I don't know, Star Trek on the television? Where did you first, like, what's your first memory where you can say, that was spec fic and I loved it?
You know, that's really a good question. I've lived a long time and a lot of my memories have faded over time. You know, I have a memory, and it wasn't really science fiction. When I was in high school, I can remember sitting in the outfield during baseball practice, and I had been reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I was just into that so much And I was imagining myself that if I could go back, I could help the hobbits defend them because I'd be bigger than them and stronger than them. That's kind of my first memory of anything that was sort of not of this universe, engagement of it.
Okay.
Well,
What is it about speculative fiction? What was that, Doc?
Lord of the Rings is amazing.
It is. So what is it about speculative fiction, sort of the umbrella setting of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, all the things, all the cool things anyway? What is it about that appeals to you, that you love?
I think as a writer, I like the idea that you take yourself into a different universe with different rules, and that engages people because that's interesting. And then you can sometimes use that to talk about the things that are very important to this world. And for me, writing the book, one of the things I wanted to do was put the characters in positions where they were under stress and had to make decisions. And none of those decisions have a good outcome. It's the question of which is the best decision under the circumstance. And those decisions have consequences for them, for the people that they care about. And they also change them because those decisions have harsh consequences and they have to own that, come to terms with it. And it changes their personality and how they see themselves over time. So for me, the idea for speculative fiction is it gets you out of this world, but it allows you to address issues which are important to this world.
I think that's a very awesome answer, actually. I think, and it really hits on one of my favorite reasons for why speculative fiction is such an important genre of literature. But how did your love of the genre transition you into writing stories in it?
So that's a good question. I've been asked it before, and I don't really have a perfect answer. I didn't actually set out to write a novel. What I had in my mind was kind of like a scenario. Something's happening, and I started to write that down. And then later on, the character just sort of took off and did their own thing. So I wasn't thinking of it in those terms. I wasn't thinking of like, I'm going to have speculative fiction and I'm going to try to resolve these issues. It just sort of started to write it itself. Just to give an example, in chapter 1, so chapter 1 was written before the prologue. In chapter 1, you've got a young man. He's a pilot. He's on a starship. He gets woken up in the middle of the night, with an alarm. Report to your spaceships, and then there's an impact alarm and there's a thump, and thump is not supposed to be felt on a starship. And he stumbles a little bit and he realizes something very serious is happening. And I actually took that from one of the experiences I had in Baghdad. I wasn't on a starship, but I was in a bunker, and I was woken up with some similar sort of alarm, and then mortar fire, thump in the distance. Nothing really dramatic. I actually just went back to sleep when it was all clear. But that sort of put me into that position of writing that portion of the book. But then the story wasn't really about that character. That ended up being a secondary character. And I went to write the prologue, and the prologue involved Lieutenant Mei Ling Lee, and she ends up being the star of the show. Just kind of took it from there. So there wasn't really a plan. Thanks, Doc, for your patience. It's like the biggest non-answer ever. Yeah.
I love the stories of the characters running amok and not doing what the author thinks they're going to do.
Yeah.
Because it makes my wild harebrained ideas feel much more normal. So
there we go. Well, I mean, the creativity is creativity. You can't really say it has to follow,
Well, one of my favorite Pern books came out of that, which is the Master Harper of Pern, which it came out way afterwards, and it was literally, Anne McCaffrey said, I wrote it because the character wouldn't shut up talking until I wrote the book. So I think it's great when characters run amok. But how are there any specific moments? Because for a lot of authors, real life, and you actually just gave us one, but are there any other moments that you'd want to say this moment influenced how I write?
Yes. So one of the other main characters is Admiral Jay Chambers. So I have to give a little bit of background on Jay Chambers. Jay Chambers is actually the name of my friend who had died after contracting ALS from being exposed to chemicals in the first Gulf War. He was a very dear friend of mine when my parents were ill and then died. And while I was in high school, his parents took me in. And we went to college together. We went in the Army together. We went to Ranger School together. And he was just a wonderful guy. But that character, the actual behavior of that character was based on me having worked with General Wesley Clark in the 1990s. He was the NATO commander, supreme NATO commander in Belgium, and we went together to the Balkans during the peacekeeping operation there. And one of the just to give you an example of what he was like, we went into Srebrenica, and you guys will remember that in Srebrenica there was a massacre there where 7,000 men and boys had been rounded up and executed in the local stadium. And then the other Muslim family members had been pushed out of the city. And so, General Clark had negotiated the Dayton Peace Accord as the military representative, and then he was the NATO commander responsible for enforcing and keeping the civil war from breaking out. So he wanted to go into Srebrenica, and I went in with him with a very small team of security people. And he was the kind of guy that just liked he would want to walk around. He'd say, "I want to go over here." He didn't follow any plan that any handler had given him. And as we were driving up, a busload of journalists from the OSCE showed up. They were all from Muslim countries, and no Muslims had been back in Srebrenica in the 3 years since the massacre. And of course, the townspeople pick up on the fact that there's a NATO commander here, and that there's a bunch of Muslims here with cameras, which they were not happy to see. And so their public affairs officer, I was his public affairs officer at the time, said, "Hey, can we do a short press conference?" So I asked him, and, he said, "Yeah, we can do one." So we were doing one on the street, and the security guys came up to me and said, "Our translator has picked up the fact that the older men in the village are telling the young boys to pick up rocks and throw them at the general." And I just realized there's 4 cameras going, about 20 journalists there. And I said, "What will you do?" And he said, "Well, we'll just get between him and the rocks and then we'll move him out." He said, "But we're not going to stop the press conference." So we continued the press conference. And then this older man who looked like he was intoxicated got up on a little wall behind him and started yelling at him. So General Clark, who actually speaks Serbian, by the way, but was speaking English, turned around and said, "Come on down here and talk to me." And the guy said, "I'm not coming down." And so he tells his translator, he says, "Tell him if he doesn't come down here, I won't talk to him." So the guy comes down, and so we've got a confrontation now. We got people on one side getting ready to throw rocks, and this drunk guy confronting him, yelling at him. And General Clark puts his hands out like this, with palms up, and he says, "What can I do for you?" And the guy started crying. He got down on his knees. He took General Clark's hands, and he said, "We're afraid you're going to push us out of our homes." Keep in mind that they're living in the homes of the people that they had killed. And General Clark said, "Did you vote in the last election?" And he said, "No." And he said, "This is your country. You should vote." And the guy, they put down the rocks and it solved the situation. So anyway, that kind of coolness under very stressful conditions that could have led to violence and an embarrassment to the alliance is the kind of coolness that I tried to build into the character for Admiral Chambers. So that was a long answer to a simple question. Thank you for your patience.
No, it's a great
Those are the best
answer.
kinds. So, obviously you mentioned that you served in the U.S. Army. So how do you feel like your time in uniform affects, other than those specific examples, the kinds of stories you tell?
One of the themes there's really two or perhaps 3 different military themes that run through the novel. One of them is a special operations theme. I went to the Ranger School as a lieutenant. I served in the 101st Airborne Division, 18th Airborne Corps, and I did some training with the Ranger Regiment, special operations training, and then I had dealt with special operations portfolios when I worked at NATO. One of the things I built into this was the Alliance Marine Commandos, right? So they are the elite of the elite. They're on this convoy of starships that gets caught up into this galactic war, and I wanted to show what it's like for in the special operations community to get ready for combat. So they train over and over again. You know, it's fire, maneuver, communications, medical, over and over again. They never get tired of it. They never are satisfied. They do it over, and then when they actually go into an operation, things just come quite naturally to them, even under great stress. And I built that in. I think it was probably one of the things that my editor had said, you know, this is a little bit too much. I don't think it's too much. I don't think it's going to be too much for anybody that's ever served in the military. And I also built that in so that you could see it from the outside, because that's how most people see it. So they have somebody along on the operation that's not part of their team that watches them go through, you know, doing a breach, you know, movement to contact, you know, how to handle casualties.
So in my experience, as long as you keep the number of pages talking about any maneuver or tactic under 10, you're good until after that. Once you start getting about 5,
I'm gonna have to go back and count it up. So
no. You start having to compare yourself and going, did I exceed David Weber? And the answer will be no. So you're good. Just tell your editor, I'm not nearly as bad as David Weber, and he's a New York Times bestselling.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what we did was we broke it up into sections, right? So even if there was a continuous operation because there's something else going on, you know, you're getting 10 pages of this, then it switches back to something else, and then you come back to that. I don't think it was overly done, but we'll see. I guess the reader will decide.
So you were an infantry officer then?
No, actually, I was an artillery officer. But thank you for the compliment. I heard you say that you're an infantryman. God bless you for the service.
Yeah.
It's the hardest job in the world. You know, I meet people all the time that don't realize that, you know, that even that they're family members. You know, I met a young man who brought some furniture over, and he was a 11 Bravo in the Gulf War, and his dad was with him. They were working together, and I said, you know, I was talking to his dad, and you could tell his dad doesn't quite understand what that means. You know, to have to be the one that closes the distance with the enemy, that sleeps out in the freezing cold or the heat. Yeah, that's an incredibly tough job, and I've just, you know, I was exposed to it at Ranger School and exposed to it as a fire support team chief. But my hat's off to anybody that's ever done that.
So we have a running gag.
Hmm?
Go ahead, Doc.
I was going to say my grandfather used to be an artillery officer, and he told me that is why you learn trigonometry.
Well, now they have computers for it, but there's a funny story. I used to actually be a gunnery instructor, and what we found out was if you just teach the computers how to do fire direction and so forth with the computers, no one ever really gets it. They're just pressing buttons. They don't see it. So when they actually have a problem, right, they can't solve it. So we actually went back to teach them what we call charts of darts, which is the manual way where you can actually sort of physically see how it all works out. You don't actually do trigonometry. That's done in a table, but it makes it a little bit easier for people to understand what's happening if they have to work it out manually. Yeah,
well, my smart ass then went and told my geometry teacher that unless I was lobbing missiles, I didn't need to know it.
And how did that go?
I could definitely see you do that.
That went really kind of interesting because he was not sure how to react to that.
Yep.
Versus my mom, who it got back, my tutor, who I told her that to, she looked at me and she goes, "That's fine, but until you get to that point, you need to know it to graduate. So sit down."
Yeah,
and
that's
shut
right.
up.
Yeah.
I had a really.
And then your mom got on a stool and smacked you around.
That's not funny.
Were you taller than your mom yet?
She had been a nun. My math tutor had been a nun.
Yeah, I believe it. Those are the worst kind, man. All right. So we've talked about how your time in uniform affects the way you tell stories and the way you represent military personnel because you use some of the people you knew. But how does it affect the way you engage with content as a consumer, as a reader, movie watcher, etc.?
Well, so first of all, I'm not one of those people that thinks that, whatever I see in the movie has to be exactly accurate. I realize that what you're doing is you're presenting something to a viewer, an audience that's probably not that military. I do like to see things that are fairly accurate. I don't like to see like incredible shots done, where it's just like, well, that's probably not going to happen. I don't like it when female officers are addressed as sir, because I've never seen anyone do that, and you see it all the time in the movies.
I've noticed that too.
Yeah. So as long as it's reasonable and I get the point that they're trying to get, that I don't sit in judgment on it. Say it's not exactly what I experienced.
There's also the suspension of disbelief when you're talking in the future. I remember there was one review exchange where someone said, "Oh, you had Space Marines and Marines don't do that," and the reply was, "Yes, but Space Marines might." And so there's that, suspension of disbelief if you push it forward just a little bit.
Yep. Yeah.
So
no, I agree with you. I think you would see all the things that I have the Space Marines doing are completely believable. I mean, there are some extra vehicular type of things, but it's not something that couldn't be done or would be too fantastic.
Yeah, I think probably the most.
Doc, your favoriteest questions of all.
Oh, fan questions. So have you had any cool fan art or somebody do a cosplay of any of your work yet?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to disappoint you on all the fan questions. We're just, I don't really have any fans. This is my first book. It's only been out for about a month or so. And I think the only fan I ever had was somebody stood up at a meeting when I was at Rotary and said, I read the book, and it's a great book and everybody should read it. That's the closest I've ever come to having a fan.
You know what? An in-person review is nice.
There we go.
So you should tell them to go post that on Amazon, though.
I did actually ask.
Or let you film it and put it on your website.
Yeah, I've got 3 reviews on Amazon, so I don't know exactly who they were, but it might have been the guy from Rotary. It's possible.
Well, here's hoping that you get many, many more. So did he ask you for your autograph?
He didn't ask me for my autograph. No, but I did give his, he already had the book. So I gave an autograph version to his wife when I met her.
Aw, that was
nice. No one has asked me for my autograph. No.
So, and has anybody asked for your autograph yet?
No.
Nope. No. Okay. So how about, do you have any weird?
Hold on. He had a really good story for that in the pre-show, which is why we left the question about when you mailed out the finished.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure when the pre-show started. So, okay. I did, as I said before, I used the name of one of my fallen comrades for FJ Chambers. He actually, he was a retired colonel when he died of ALS from having been exposed to chemicals in the First Gulf War. And I asked his widow for permission to use his name, which she'd given me. And then 10 years later, when the book was finally, finished, I sent her and all of her 5 adult children a copy of the book with a little inscription, telling them that their father was a great man. He was a hero. He saved my life more than once. And I got some really nice, a really thoughtful note back from 2 of her sons and from her. I think it made a difference to them, but they didn't ask me for that. I just provided it to them.
I think that's absolutely amazing. So
you've made him effectively immortal.
Yeah. So, I think that's probably. I don't know. I think your question is next.
I know. I'm a firm believer that our friends that are gone aren't really gone if we remember them and we keep their stories alive. So
yeah.
Doc, try to contain yourself. You're going to make people think you're human and stuff.
Well, okay, I'm going to and so we don't get into our personal backgrounds as much on the show, but my hometown was Dhahran, Saudi Arabia.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
how was that?
My parents were working for the oil company as expats.
Oh my
so
goodness.
I remember when it happened, and I was all of like 8 years old, and I remember freaking out because it's all going on the news, and the news. And when every adult in your world knows what's going on, but you don't, because we were stateside on repat at the time.
Okay.
And my dad, though, had to go back over there after vacation. And my mom kept telling me, don't worry, don't cry, because U.S. soldiers are there protecting your daddy.
Yeah.
No,
Isn't that sweet?
it was really so. Yeah, I was like, damn it, there's onions in the room because.
I can tell you, it's emotional for you. God bless you.
So it was part of why I became a soldier.
There we go.
So
thank you.
Yeah, but so JR, you should ask your question.
All right, we'll try to lighten the mood and let her.
I'm fine.
Yeah. So
I have allergies.
This is where we ask you allergies. Absolutely. So could you give us a list of the Reader's Digest version of your body of work? What all have you written?
Okay, so that's easy. Start your stopwatch. This is my first book that I've published. My only other publications, I was the writer and the executive producer for 2 short films. One was A Child Lies Here. It's sort of a ghost story. And the other one was Doug's Christmas. Doug's Christmas was actually about a Korean War veteran in modern times. So this is probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, who's living in Chicago. He's a wealthy established businessman, but he's never really gotten over the loss of one of his friends in combat back in during the Korean War. And he sort of deals with that by at Christmas time, because his friend had been killed at Christmas time. He deals with that by reaching out to a family in need and sort of bonding with the children and helping them out, and sort of a Scrooge kind of story. But the main character for that was Clark Devereaux, and Clark Devereaux was actually a first sergeant and a quad 50 gunner in the Korean War. And when he told that story, so now I'm going to start getting with allergies, but he tells the story. So we worked it so that the story of the loss is actually his story, right? It's a real story about being on the quad 50, taking fire, the vehicle catches on fire and his friend is killed. And he starts to cry when he tells the story. And this is all on film. It's being done in a bar. And everybody was all emotional, but the young woman who was actually on the camera has tears streaming down her face. So those are the only 2 things that I did. Of course, I was a military officer. I got dozens of publications and, war college journals and stuff like that, but nothing like those things.
So this is where the history nerd in me is going to come out for just a second, dear listener. And if you're a veteran or a veteran and they've got stories, the Library of Congress is doing a project where they're encouraging all of the combat veterans to tell their stories. There's a historiography. There's a process you go through so it's documented properly, but they try to document everything in your words on camera. I will link to that in the show notes. I will track down what that's called and the project involved. I know it's through the Library of Congress because I facilitated a few of those when I was in grad school. But that is a good thing to do. These stories will be getting lost. This is especially true if you're a veteran of the late unpleasantness in Mesopotamia, because most of us send our contact through AKO accounts, which don't exist anymore. So all of that data got lost. And so there's just the stories are getting lost in ways that we didn't in a pre-digital age. So if you've got those stories to tell, even if you don't want to tell your families, just get them recorded so posterity can know. But all right, so we're obviously then here to talk about the Achilles Fleet Battle Fleet series, which is book 1 is titled Mei Ling Li. So where did you get the premise for this universe? Was it psychedelics, Ouija boards, expired MREs?
Oh, that's a good point. Well, the standard view of where it takes place is something we're probably familiar with. It's 500 years in the future. What's happened in our future was that the war on terrorism weakened the international order, and because it affected its credibility. Then came the pandemics of the 21st century. Then came nuclear war. Then came a century of chaos. And after a century of chaos, the alliance is formed, and the alliance is a federation of nations with the sort of a military core. And when they get faster than light travel, the alliance becomes a federation of worlds. And so you've got spaceships. It's all what we've seen before, sort of based on Battlestar Galactica, Scenario, Star Trek, Star Wars. that kind of theme. So it's not so weird that you wouldn't recognize it, and I just used that as the format for telling the story, which is, like I said before, I was interested in what's happening to the characters, not necessarily the scenario. The scenario was just the forum to get that done.
So you're obviously very character focused as an author in the way you conceptualize the story. Did that carry through with the finished product, or did you smooth that all over in post?
No, so I think in the characters are what the story was about, and as it goes all the way through, it's book one in the Mei Ling Lee series. Both the plot and the status of the characters lends itself to resolution. There are unresolved things that sort of have to be resolved in the follow-on books, but I did keep with the characters. I think the characters was the most important aspect.
Okay. I like character-driven stories, so that's not a bad thing. So before we go any farther, we're going to take a moment to dig into the cover. Let me pull that up on the screen. So how did you come up with the cover? How did you make it yourself? Did you hire that out? What's the story? What's the story here?
So my editor, David Himmel, did that for me. He had asked me, what do you want on it? And I said, well, I think you ought to have Mei Ling Lee, maybe in a spacesuit or something like that, and then something behind it that shows that it's science fiction. And so he was the one that came up with that. I thought he did a really nice job with it. I do have to make it a little bit of an aside here, is that the character Mei Ling Lee is actually based on my ex-wife, Sonia Mei Ling Wilson. Her middle name is Mei Ling. She's born in Hong Kong. She's also a martial artist, a 5th degree black belt, speaks languages. And so I based that character on her. Just so you know, I have a very good relationship with my ex-wife, so I'm not worried about her tracking me down. And so there was a real person behind that. And it looks just like that picture. You just ask her, she'll tell you.
So that you just got lucky that you found like the stock art that worked, or was this a specific model that you tracked down?
No,
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure what David did. I think he used some stock art, but there was some artistic work done to make that the way it looks, though. But thank you for that. I do think it's a good cover.
Okay. All right, Doc, back to you. Question 20. If the onions.
Okay, so what would your 30-second elevator pitch for this novel be?
Okay. Can I just read it off the back, or do I have to say it from?
You can read it off the back.
Okay, so Human Alliance Lieutenant Mei Ling Lee serves in a backwater assignment as an aide to the Inspector General of a ragtag convoy of starships, evacuating civilians from a contested area of the galaxy. When the convoy is attacked by an unknown enemy wielding a seemingly impossible technology, Lee is thrust into the center of a galactic struggle as a key leader in the newly formed Achilles battle fleet. As the conflict continues, she is forced to draw upon her martial arts skill and her inner strength as she fights alongside the fleet's Marine Commando unit. In the desperate war that follows, Lee struggles with budding romance, new friendships, and startling betrayals to become the warrior she was meant to be. 30 seconds.
So is this more Space Fleet or Space Marine on the subgenre of MIL-SF, or did you mix it up a little bit?
It's mixed up. So one of the things that I had done, one of my jobs, since you guys are former military, you'll understand it, but I was assigned as an ROTC instructor at the University of Colorado back in 1990, I think. And I taught the military history course. So they sent me out to Fort Leavenworth to take the military history course, a couple weeks out there. And one of the things I worked into the fleet battles was their historical precedent, right? So the very first battle is based on Alexander at Guatemala when he defeats the Syrians when he's outnumbered 10-1. He uses certain tactics, and I worked that into there. There's a scene where it's reminiscence of Admiral Nelson at the Nile. There's a funeral oration, which is Pericles during the Peloponnesian Wars. So there is a lot of tactics and strategy that is sort of drawn from military history. and a lot of it's not even mentioned. I mean, it's just there if the reader is interested, they could, if they have that background. For example, the initial attack takes place on the 500th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. There's no mention of that. Nobody notices that. The reader can notice it or not. And then there is a separate theme or a parallel theme for what the Marines are doing. So the Marines are training. They actually go on an operation, which is for all practical purposes a ground operation. It does involve, inserting onto a moon with an asteroid and spacesuits and a little bit of interesting stuff. But the breach of the bunker is a standard breach. Clearing the areas is standard. Handling prisoners is standard, maybe with a little bit of a quirk in there. So yeah, those two themes sort of run together. And then along with that, there's the martial arts theme. I was a martial artist. I trained and competed in the Army. I had competition teams that I was a team captain for. And I did work some of that into the novel.
All right, so before I dive into the history nerddom, because that's speaking my language, we won't, because Doc will give me evil eye, and she gets really stabby when she gets mad. It's gruesome, and unfortunately for me, she actually paid attention in biology as a medic, so like she knows how to make you bleed, and it's ugly. So instead, Doc, next question is still yours.
It is still mine. So I think you got into it a bit, but what makes your series really special and unique in the crowded field of Mill SF?
Yeah, no, it's good. I realized that when I first published it, I was somewhere around the 500th most popular book on Amazon. 500,000, excuse me, right? No, I'd love to be in the top 500. I think what is refreshing about this is the character development. As I said before, I think that's going to be interesting to anything, and good science fiction is good literature. There is an element in there, a theme of a woman in a sort of a male-dominated world trying to make her way. I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote that I wrote into the story, slightly different from what had actually happened. But my wife, who was my ex-wife, as I told you, Mei-Ling Lee is modeled on her. So she, in real life, Sonia Mei-Ling Wilson, is about 5'2". She's tough looking. She doesn't look like anybody's victim. But in her office, one of the males had one of the men there was aware that she was a black belt, and he thought that was kind of funny. And so he snuck up behind her and poked her with his finger. And she spun. She doesn't like that, by the way. She spun around and put him in a submission hold and said,
"No one likes that."
Yeah, this guy's at least a foot taller, 100 pounds heavier. And she said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "No, I'm good. I'm good." And she twisted him a little bit, and she said, "Are you sure? I can't help you." He says, "No, I'm fine." And she said, "I don't like to be touched." And she let him go. Not everybody could do that, but I did write that into the book. There's an incident in the book where Mei-Ling is approached by a bully in the gymnasium. He's trying to intimidate her, and she basically lets him know that wasn't a good idea. And that works its way into the story a little bit later on because these characters, they come back.
Well, because the Army is, the biggest job where you can move around and still find the same people.
Yeah, isn't that true? Yeah, that's true. You do see. I have a little anecdote there. When I was in Baghdad in, I want to say 2016. So realize I retired in 2004. So I was a civilian. I was already 60 years old or something like that, and I got invited over to the U.S. Embassy for a dinner because I was a NATO representative, and I guess they thought that was appropriate. So I went over to the U.S. Embassy for a dinner, and at the dinner was a woman that I had gone to high school with, and she was still in uniform, right? She was a lieutenant colonel. She was a pilot. She'd been in the first and second Gulf War, and she'd gotten out of the military to raise her kids and stayed in the reserves, and then come back in the military. So here she was, my age, 60 years old, still getting shot at. I just have to take my hat off to her. But yeah, it's a small world, and wow, I hadn't seen her in 45 years or something.
Yeah. It definitely can be. And I like it when people incorporate that to a point because it's important because it is a community. Um, but which tropes do you feel you either hit the best or that you've just taken and gone, I'm going to take this and I'm going to twist it? This is what we call my tropalicious question. Which
Oh,
JR,
the trope, yeah. Okay, so the trope that actually is written into the book, right? And it was written into General Clark, who was kind enough to write the foreword for the book, is that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And if you read the book, none of the military operations go as planned. They're not even close, right? And it's one disaster after the next. But what happens is, of course, if you have to have a plan, right? You can't just sort of willy-nilly, go out there and hope for the best. But because they had a plan and because they know what their overall objective is, then they can modify and change things when things start to go bad, which they always do. Sometimes terribly bad. Sometimes the overall objective is completely unaccomplished, and yet some good comes out of it. And I snuck in something which I'm sure my editor probably didn't like, and that was an after-action review when things went to shit. And I did it just the way we did it at the National Training Center, which was, what were you supposed to do? What did we do? What's the doctrine? Who's responsible? What did the enemy do? And what are the lessons learned? And I made the Admiral walk everybody through it, so that you could see how an after-action review was done correctly. So
I love that. I don't think even David Weber's managed to do one of those in his books.
Don't challenge him. That man is prolific. He just might.
I could message him right now, JR.
he needs to give me credit then if he's going to do it, since I did it first, right?
So,
All right.
we're not going to challenge David. No. So,
All right.
JR.
Oh, I was about to, but you kept trying to talk. So I know there's a little bit of lag with you tonight. All right, so let's talk about the story itself. Why don't you tell us a little bit more? Is there anything you haven't told us about Mei Ling Lee that would be interesting to readers, or do we want to move on to secondary characters? Because you've told us a little bit. She's an officer, in the fleet with some martial arts skills, and we sort of see a day in the life of her evolving
JR
with
would
the
have
changing crisis.
Her. Just saying.
Well, it depends. Does she threaten to stab me and tell me I'm wrong?
Is that
No,
what
I mean, one of the things that I do very early in the book, in the prologue, is I put her in a position of having to take command in a crisis over a group of people who don't know who she is and don't know what's going on. And I put that in there just because that's what military people have to do. And I also, because she's a woman, she has to walk onto a bridge, after there's been casualties, and she needs to take charge of the operation, and she needs to explain to them what they need to do, and what the overall objectives are. At the same time, lots of things are happening. She's receiving guidance from her boss. She doesn't have all the people she needs to do this, so she has to start reaching out and making sure that some of those people can come in. And I thought that might be interesting because I suspect that just about every military leader from corporal on up has at some point done something like that.
Yeah, I would think so. So what about secondary characters? Were there any secondary characters that jump out to you that were your favorites or were especially memorable?
Yes. So I was actually told by my brother's actually a retired professor of literature, and he told me when I first showed it to him many years ago that there were too many characters. But I don't think there are, because I've looked at some other books that have them. But so there's some other main characters. So the two main characters, obviously, Chambers and Lee, and we talked a little bit about them. There is also a woman who is a nurse practitioner, and she's a civilian. She's actually part of the group of people that is being evacuated. And when the convoy gets hit, she is one of the very few surviving medical professionals, and she gets drawn into being sort of one of the doctors for this group. And because she's a nurse practitioner, she knows how everything works. Like my daughter is a doctor, but if you want to put a clinic together, you're going to get the nurse in there to do it. So she has to step up. She's from Hungary. Her name is Laura Zaccani. Laura Zaccani is actually the name of one of my former martial arts students who was Hungarian when I was in Belgium. I had trained her and her sister and her father. Her father was a colleague of mine. And I asked, of course, her permission to use her name for that. But she's key because she has to do the challenge of stepping up to major medical operations, which are beyond her previous experience. She also gets sort of conscripted into the Navy as a naval lieutenant, and she's not used to that. And she has to try to figure out what her role is and how she relates to the other people. And of course, she gets drawn into there's a conspiracy that she has to try to help solve when she goes. So that's Laura Zaccani. Then there's an older Hungarian pilot. He's in his 60s. He's actually a former special operations petty officer. Many years later, he's become a pilot, and he is the confidant of Admiral Chambers. In fact, we find out as we read through it that he was the first NCO to train Admiral Chambers when Admiral Chambers joined the Special Operations Forces right out of high school. And he's on his way to being retired, but he gets pulled back in because of his experience, because Admiral Chambers trusts him to go forward. There's a character called Andy Danner. Danner is about 20 years old. He's a seaman apprentice, and he gets pulled into the intelligence section because he's a smart guy. He goes through this interview where he basically sort of sets the interviewer back on his heels because he's smarter than the people that are interviewing him. And he ends up becoming a naval ensign and being in charge of the intelligence section. One of my favorite characters is John Raymond. John Raymond is a chief petty officer. He's the head of the maintenance section. He's introduced as this tough, gruff old guy that knows how all the vessels work and gets them ready and that kind of stuff. And it turns out that when the convoy has been attacked and there's been some sort of demonstration of a superior technology, that he steps forward, and it turns out that he is a famous physicist who has been hiding from government assassins for the last 20 years by enlisting in the Navy. And he steps up and he says, I think I know what they're doing, but we need to do X, Y, and Z to try to find out. So part of that mystery, the science part, and that person is based on my brother, Raymond Wilson. So it was Raymond John Wilson, and I made it John Raymond. My brother Ray was a PhD student when he got drafted during the Vietnam War, and he ended up being a stockade guard in the military police. But they used his smarts to help the prisoners get their GEDs. He was the education officer, which was perfectly matched for. So I stuck him in there as a scientist, and again I got his permission to do all of that. And then there was one other major character, a guy named Bowman. He's a reserve pilot. He likes being a pilot. He's kind of bored with being a college professor in his normal life. He's on reserve. He's on active duty for reserve duty when this all takes place. And he ends up being the one applying his knowledge of military history to tactics, and ends up moving up and into greater leadership responsibility. That's it.
That's interesting. So now did you do audio? Because I want to see what happens when the guy comes out of hiding. Because that just sounds amusing.
Yeah, well, we did do an audio. David Himmel and Tommy Beardmore. Tommy Beardmore was the producer for the audio, and he's also the guy that's leading the marketing team. But they had recruited this young woman, Harmony Zhang. She's from Chicago. She had just graduated from DePaul University with an MFA in theater, and she'd done some voice acting things before. And they recruited her to do the audiobook, and she's really good, really, really good, because the book wasn't written with the audio version in mind. I was just writing things down, So, for example, at the end of the story, there's a court-martial with 11 speakers, right? And they're all speaking in English, but they have Chinese accents, they have East African accents, they have Southern accents. There's older males and younger women, and she just nails it. and it's really, really beautiful. The way she handled it. And it was actually a lot of fun. You guys will love this, but I have a lot of acronyms in the book. So every time I use an acronym, I always explain what it was, because I realized that the reader is not necessarily military. So the reader doesn't know what OP4 means, right? Or comm channels, or, or lots of different things like that, or bogey. But you don't always know how to pronounce those things because they're not all words in the English language. So she's not military. So the first time she ran through it, we had to say, okay, all right, I'm sorry, but this is how this is pronounced. And she just did it. She did a really great job. The other thing that was really good about it is a lot of the speakers in the book are Mandarin or Cantonese speakers who are speaking in English, right? But
Okay.
she's a native Mandarin speaker, so she knows exactly how that accent is supposed to sound.
Yeah, and there's a
and
rhythm
how
to that language.
there's a rhythm to it, and certain words are pronounced. And of course, some of the words are in Chinese. I mean, the names are Chinese, and they are pronounced differently than you would think. So she's got all that right. And plus, I know you guys have worked with audio people before. I didn't serve as a producer, but the producers just loved working with her. She is easy to work with. She's good. She doesn't mind redoing things. And the other wonderful thing that happened is, this was my first book, and sometimes there are inconsistencies in the book that you don't catch unless you hear them.
Yeah.
Spoken, and some of those she caught and pointed out, and some of them, we caught and we went, oh, that's not going to work. So luckily we hadn't published the book yet, so we went back and changed the text. But it was a real blessing, and that has just come out now, the audio version, and we're really excited about it. I think people are going to love it.
Okay, so now this is the part where we would ask you about bad guys. So what can you tell us about the bad guys, obviously without giving us spoilers, because this is spoiler-free zone.
Sure. Okay, got it. Okay, so there's, the conflict comes in a couple of different ways. So first of all, I'll tell you there's a big conspiracy. It's partially revealed, but not fully revealed. So people who like conspiracies are going to love this novel. At the beginning, they have one adversary, that the only adversary they've ever had, and that is a foreign species but that's why they're withdrawing from this one contested area, because of the conflict with that species. And then they get this big, huge attack, which is galaxy-wide, and it doesn't make any sense. Something else is going on. And so some of the characters pick up on that earlier, and it's one of the reasons why they want to have an intelligence section, because they know that they are being misled, or they suspect that they're being misled about who their adversaries are. So we call them the others, just because that's the name that they have. But there are some bad guys in there. Of course, there's the confrontation with Mei Ling in the gym, but that's quickly resolved by her. But what you find out is that there are people that they work with every day who aren't who they say they are. And that's very disturbing, I think, to everyone. When people that you work with, and you find out later that normally it's not a worldwide galactic conspiracy, but they're not straight shooters. They're saying one thing and doing another, and then there are some bad guys along those lines for sure.
Okay.
So,
all right, Doc. Next one.
This is my favorite. One of my favorite questions. If your characters knew who you were and the role you played in their lives, how would you fare if they met you in a back alley somewhere?
All right, but so hold on, Doc. We get to ask this one in two parts, because you being a martial artist. So answer as now, and then answer when you were in your prime, because that would be a fair assessment for you.
Well, all of these characters could kick my butt, even when I was in my prime, the tough ones. But I think your question is, if because as the writer, I put them through a lot, right?
Yeah.
Would they be angry with me?
Yeah.
I don't think so. At least I hope not. The one of the quotes from Epictetus was, "Don't wish for things the way you want them to be. Wish for them to be just as they are." That's sort of a Stoic ideal, which is, the path you're on, the where you are now is a result of what's happened to you, but it's really a result of your decisions. You didn't get to control all the things that happened to you, but you get to control how you respond to them. And so, for those that lived through it, I think they would say, yeah, that's okay. that was a challenge. I mean, there's a scene at the end after Mei Ling has done some things when they all get investigated. It's just exactly what happens in the Army, right? There's a punishment for the people who did all the work. And they've been in serious combat. They've lost some of their friends, and they're being investigated by people who haven't been there and who can't possibly understand why they made the decisions they made. And it's extraordinarily frustrating for her. I don't think she wants to go back and be one of those people. She wants to be one of the people that went with the Marines into difficult situations and did difficult things. So I think they would thank me.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
So
I was expecting a little bit more hubris, and no, I totally kicked their ass.
No, I will tell you, this is a true story. When I was 35 years old, I was a state champion for Louisiana for the AAU in forms, sparring, and musical forms. And I was the coach for a military competition team. And I one time was in a studio, and there was a young man who had never trained a day in his life. And he was hitting me so hard, right, that my instructor actually walked over to me and said, "Don't take that from him anymore. Just put him down. This is embarrassing," right? So I let the guy walk into a back kick, which really should have put him down. And he was just like, that was pretty good, So anyway, I talked to him afterwards. He was a nice kid. He was about 18. He wasn't trying to be mean or anything. He was just incredibly strong. He's kind of like the Mike Tyson of, the Louisiana backwoods. And I said, "Have you ever trained before?" And he said, "Well, me and my uncle, we sometimes box," but he wasn't trained as a boxer because I could have picked that up. And when I got home, I had bruises all up and down my left arm, which I was using to protect myself. You should have some humility. That guy could have just about beat anybody I've ever seen, and he'd never trained a day in his life. He was just as tough as that. You cannot tell from looking at them whether they're tough. So I don't think you should say, "Oh yeah, I could beat anybody." You don't know whether you could beat anybody. You're lucky to come back with your life, and better to walk away.
Fair. So, all right,
So,
Doc, next is on you.
JR loves this question, but do you have a favorite character archetype?
Okay, I probably do, and that would be a female person thrown into a struggling environment and having to come through. And I use Mei Ling. A little bit of background. One of the things I did over the years, so I've trained women self-defense for decades, but I've also, when we were in Belgium, I had a couple of schools, and we would often train young people that were expats. So they were coming through NATO, high school students, or young adults there to get their master's degree or something like that, men and women. But a lot of times, for a period of time there, I trained people for the local school, for the local church. There was a Baptist church there. And the parents would drop their kids off and pick them up, drop them off, pick them up. And they wouldn't actually stay and watch what was happening. And then we would have like a test, after a couple of months. So the pastor would come and the parents would come. And then some of these young women, had never been taught to sort of stand up for themselves. They hadn't played sports. They were told to be meek and mild and polite and deferential to everyone. And then when they would see them in the test, where they would be breaking boards or defending themselves from larger opponents who were swinging clubs at them or sparring and holding their own, they were amazed. They were amazed that their daughter could do that. And I'm not saying that it was important because they could fight, but I think it's important. It's a tool to train people to stand up for themselves. And so I actually like that that character. I like people who everybody underestimates, and then they through their force of character and the decisions they take, they do better. And there's a male character in the book that's like that too. But that's the closest thing.
Okay.
So were there any, this is our sausage question. So were there any scenes or ideas you cut from the final book that you may want to use in another book later on in the series?
Yeah, so actually, no. So I just wrote in, I was a new author and, I thought I knew best. My editor at one point, there's a scene in there, for example, where they start a midshipman's training program. And one of the characters goes through that program. It's physical training and other things that are going on. and you're into what's going on with him as he's exhausted and terrified and doesn't want to embarrass himself in front of his peers, all the things that, we go through in military training. And my editor said, I don't see why that's in there. It doesn't further the plot. It's true. It doesn't have anything to do with the plot. But I put it in there partly for character development, partly because I just wanted to put it in there because it kind of reminded me of Ranger School, and partly because I wanted to use those characters to be developed later on for subsequent parts of the trilogy, or perhaps spin-off novels with those characters at the lead. I wanted to have some basis for what they had gone through. So I did not have to cut anything from the book.
Awesome.
All right. So, Doc, we don't call it the sausage question. People are going to get the wrong idea. It's how the sausage was made, or a look behind the curtain.
Oh,
Jeez.
I understood.
It's not that kind of podcast.
JR just likes to give me grief when he can.
Yeah, but most of the time I don't do it on air, but today was special. So finally, what can you tell us about what can you tell us about the universe where the story happens? So in many series, the worlds where the story is taking place is as much a character as the protagonist and antagonist. So what can we expect of the universe of the Achilles battle fleet?
So it's pretty standard universe. So 500 years in the future, they have fashion and light travel, but most everything they have is, for example, I have them using regular firearms with projectiles. There's not much in the way of individual space lasers. One of the things that does happen, though, is there is a scientific breakthrough, which I use as sort of a speculative application of quantum field theory. So what the enemy is using against them, they don't understand how it's working, right? It's moving things around quickly. It just doesn't seem possible that they're doing that. They're moving people around. And what I had done was I had taken quantum field theory and quantum mechanics and sort of applied it in a way that's not possible now, and that has the potential sort of changing the environment for future novels. But otherwise, it's very recognizable as something along the lines of Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica.
So every good sci-fi reader and author knows that if you add dark matter or quantum in front of anything, all things are possible, and the Handwavium has been achieved. I know
I thought it was my idea. I don't know. Yeah.
Doc's an actual scientist, so she gets mad at me for this, but math doesn't really matter.
I don't ever want to have to take quantum mechanics again.
You're probably the only person I've ever met that actually has taken quantum mechanics. So my hat's off to you. I thought you didn't like a geometry,
rocket scientist.
Yeah,
I didn't. It was required to take it willingly.
Well, you're going to have to read the book now and tell me how off the mark I was.
Well, I dealt with it specifically in chemistry, so that's a very specific area.
So it says on the Amazon listing for this that this is book 1 of a series of 1, but presumably you've mentioned more books are coming. So where do you see this series going, and what's next for these characters?
Okay, so as I said before, the book is intention. The plot is unresolved, right? We still don't really know what's behind the conspiracy. We don't know what's going to happen to the alliance because it's starting to come apart at the seams. And all those characters that I mentioned all have some sort of unresolved issue. So they're split in a million different places, and at some point they're going to have to come back together. And sort of that's the challenge. I have been in my last year of law school, which is horrible. Sorry, it's like way harder than I thought it was going to be, and I haven't been able to do any writing, and I'm probably not going to be able to do any writing really until I graduate in May, and then I will go back to being a full-time writer, and I will sort some of these things out.
Well, that's good. We are looking forward to seeing what comes next with these characters.
Well,
with books like this, the science and the technology and the world itself are as much a character in the novel, but consistent rules really help make science fiction. Right. Is there any tech that you developed though from this that you'd want to keep? Like, what was your favorite tech item, and that you'd want to keep?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I didn't really want to give all of it away. I talked a little bit about earlier, but there is an application of quantum mechanics field theory, the Higgs boson, that has the potential to revolutionize the way people live their lives. It's in the book. It's being used for sinister purposes, but I think if that were a real thing, I'd want to keep it, and I don't want to say any more about it.
Okay.
I'm afraid I'll give it away.
So we will have you
Well,
on.
then that means you.
What?
I was just say that means we can't ask him how he would use and abuse it because that would still be spoiler. Because that's part of the fun. The follow up to that question is, what tech would you want for daily use? Now, how would you abuse it?
I don't know.
I can't say. Yeah.
Probably too ethical to abuse it. So.
Oh, you're giving me way too much credit.
That. It's
Thank you.
He's so ethical.
There we go.
All right, Doc, ask him about aliens because he can answer that one, I hope.
Unicorns do exist. So you mentioned briefly that you have another sentient thing or entity in this book. How did you go about creating your aliens? Do we know what they look like, or are you the only one who knows what they look like yet?
Yeah, that's good. I don't even think I know what they look like. What you find out is that they've been fighting. They had a war with the others a century ago, right? But they've never communicated with them. And they're not even sure that they can communicate with them. So they don't know anything about the others. And because this is a conspiracy, the others are a false flag. So it's not clear that the others will have any role in the future books. So the aliens were just something to get it going. But the real conspiracy is people against people.
Okay.
The enemy is us.
So then let's pivot that then and ask this from a hypothetical standpoint, because you're obviously an author. You've got your first book. You're here. If you were going to create outside of this universe, if you were going to create your own aliens, because this is part of the fun of the question, how do you think you'd do that? Would you let your nightmares inspire you? Would you use actual biological entities and go from there? Would you create it completely out of an imagination?
Oh my goodness. That's a good question. I think the default action is an alien that's something like a human, because that's who we would probably interact with if there were ever, if it was an alien that was so completely different that we probably never see them or know them or be aware of them. If I had to do it on the spot, it would be something like a human, but not exactly like a human.
So would you take the Star Trek different forehead ridge of the week, or would you just make them 2 arms and 2 legs?
You are going to
what are you shaking your head for, Doc?
Klingon is going to kill you one day.
Yeah, there we go.
Well,
I was thinking about the Star Trek thing with the forehead. I was thinking about that. Yeah, I was thinking about.
So, Doc, are we talking like Klingon from the Klingon from the original series, from Next Generation, from Enterprise? Because they all look radically different.
All of them would kill you.
And for all, we'll take the Next Generation. For all, Worf was supposedly this badass alien, like. He was getting his butt kicked by
Don't you dare insult Worf. You will not survive.
Okay, all I'm saying is the little tiny ladies on the Enterprise were always beating the crap out of the Klingons. So I'm like, well, if the military race is getting the crap kicked out of them by a 5-foot woman.
They covered that. It's because he wasn't hitting back hard because he was afraid of hurting them. So stop it. I remember these episodes better than you do. You'll have another concussion at this rate.
So how do you cover the blonde chick? It was the security officer before him who was doing the same thing. She was beating up on the Klingon people that board. She's getting hate mail already. The people boarding the ship.
I'm not the one getting hate mail. You're the one flirting with danger here.
All I'm saying is
Santa's bringing you a pineapple pizza on pizza.
So for the big bad, they get their butts kicked a lot. That's all I'm going to say. There wasn't a lot of competence there, and we'll move on.
You're going to die.
All right, send your hate mail to Doc Cisca at blastersandbladepodcast.com. So clearly, clearly this is winding down because we're bickering. Maybe it'll scratch my back. It does itch a little bit. All right. So, was there anything about Mei Ling Lee, book 1 of the Achilles Fleet series, that we didn't ask that you want to tell us before we move on?
No, I think we're good. I think we did a good coverage. I appreciate it.
All right. So before we let you go, dear listener, we wanted to remind you that your reviews matter. So share your thoughts on the reviewing platforms. They help the right reader find the right books. So please be kind and speak your minds. Rumor has it that for every 100 reviews an author gets, they get a unicorn. I want to get one so I can grill it and see if it tastes like chicken. But the reviews matter, and I don't know what he would do with his unicorn. He'd probably like feed it and stuff and just like let it do unicorn stuff. But I'm totally making jerky.
You can't.
But anyway, that's why I'm making jerky. You can't really mess that up.
Oh, yes, you
I think
can.
it's probably idiot proof.
Yes, you can.
We'll talk offline. All right. So do all the things. Review it on Goodreads, on Amazon, all the places you buy and consume books, review it there. So Brenden, before we let you go, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, they'll be in the show notes.
Sure. So the Achilles Battle Fleet is on Amazon. You can also go to my website, which is brendanwilsonwrites.com. I do have an Instagram account, and it's at brendanwilsonwrites. And there's a Facebook account, author Brenden Wilson, and you can find me on Facebook, for my own account too. I think that's about it right there. Yeah. And there is a Kindle version, an audio version, and a paperback version.
Awesome.
Outstanding. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Twitter, which is twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can send all hate mail to Doc Cisca at blastersandbladespodcast.com. We promise maybe somebody will actually answer that. I don't know. You can hang out with us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen. It's facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. Please join the shenanigans over there. Tell Doc why pineapple does not belong on pizza. It is heretical and should not be allowed to continue.
It does.
You can follow us on our website. It's heresy. Our website at anchor.fm/Blasters.
Again. Be careful.
I'm gonna start getting mail like all over, mailed to my PO box with like pineapples or something. I can see it now. We have our website at anchor.fm/blasters-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-blades, where you can also support the show on a reoccurring basis, much like a Patreon model. Or if you want to do a one-time donation, we can support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I will keep my co-host Doc Cisca and Nick Garber do. His wife's gonna kill me now. That's it. I'm done. She's gonna stab me. Doc Garber. Yeah, I'll keep them intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders. Dang it.
I'm laughing too.
All right, so thank you for spending some of your precious time with us, for Nick Garber and Doc Cisca.
Yo, now you got it right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. Please be sure to go check out this book and leave a review. We love new authors, and of course, vets are dear and near to our hearts. So thank you for sticking with us, and this is season 2, so this will be fun. We'll be back same time, same place, same wacko people, talking about our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and our ADHD ways.
Absolutely. Before we let you go,
we do use an outline.
I ought to move this to the. Yeah, we really do need to move this to like. The religion question is: how do you take your pizza? Do you put the heretical pineapple on your pizza, sir?
I'll eat whatever anybody else is eating, so I'm open to it.
See?
Okay, we'll let that one pass. He's a peacemaker.
You can cut it if you want.
Have a nice
time as a diplomat.
Great. Hey.